Snow fell in thick, choking sheets across the Ardennes. The trees weighed heavy with ice, their limbs bowing under the winter's cruel grip. Suddenly, a distant rumble broke the silence. A German Tiger tank, steel-gleaming engine, growling, rolling toward a terrified village. Yet before it could crush the earth beneath a sharp, thunderous crack split the air. A bazooka round tore through the frozen morning, striking metal with a sound that echoed like doom. Soldiers froze, eyes, wide mouths open, some dropping rifles in shock. The tank shuddered, armor-dented fire licking from its turret. Whispers spread among the German ranks. They come with these. New weapons, impossible to stop. Explosions erupted in rapid succession. Smoke curled in ghostly ribbons, hiding the forest beyond. Men shouted orders, the snow turning red beneath them. Yet still they advanced. From the tree line, another bazooka rose, a lone figure braced against the wind, finger on trigger calculating every heartbeat, every inch of recoil. Shells slammed into tracks, hatches the air thick with tension and terror. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then silence, broken only by the crackling of fire and distant cries. The impossible had happened. Tanks, the pride of an empire, felled by a handful of determined soldiers, wielding weapons that seemed to defy reason. Rumors began almost immediately, whispered among the survivors, that these weapons were blessed, cursed, or guided by spirits, that the men who fired them had eyes like the wolves, senses sharp to the heartbeat of steel. German reports would later mention the bazooka phenomenon with disbelief. Official logs called it improbable. Yet the men who stood there in the snow remembered every flash, every scream, every smell of cordite and burning metal. History was being written in the mud and frost of December, and the legend of the bazooka was born. And so as the night fell, over the Ardennes, shadows of soldiers and machines danced among the snowdrifts, frozen in time yet alive in memory. This is where the ordinary met the extraordinary, where the roar of engines met the whistle of steel projectiles, and the fate of men was decided in a heartbeat. The Battle of the Bulge had begun, and with it a story of courage, terror, and the weapons that changed war forever. The Ardennes forest stretched endlessly, a frozen maze of evergreens and snow-draped valleys. It was December 1944, and the bitter cold gnawed at the hands, faces, and hearts of every soldier on both sides. The Americans were weary from weeks of defensive maneuvers. Their supplies stretched thin, their lines tenuous. Every hill, every hollow, every ridge could hide an enemy ambush, and every footstep risked snapping the brittle silence of snow-covered underbrush. The Germans, however, saw opportunity in the chaos. Hitler's last gamble. Operation Wacht am Rhein aimed to punch through the Allied lines and seize Antwerp. Armored divisions, including the feared Tiger and Panther tanks, rumbled silently along icy roads, confident in their firepower and experience. But the Ardennes was no ordinary terrain. Narrow passes, frozen streams, and dense woods slowed their advance. Vehicles became trapped in snowdrifts, engines groaning under the strain. The forest itself seemed to conspire against movement, a silent witness to the coming storm. American forces had been caught off guard. Intelligence reports underestimated the size and speed of the German assault. Men huddled in foxholes, rationing bullets and hope alike, while artillery shells screamed overhead, shaking the forest like thunder. Commanders whispered over radios, planning small counterattacks, desperate to hold critical crossroads. And then unexpectedly, new weapons arrived, bazookas light enough to carry through the snow, yet deadly enough to pierce even the heaviest armor. Soldiers were trained quickly, drills performed in the freezing dawn. The sound of metal clanking against frozen earth echoed in makeshift training grounds. Orders came in terse, clipped bursts: aim, fire, reload, repeat. Yet no one knew how this weapon would shape the battle. Legends would later say it was the bazooka that leveled the field, turning forests and frozen roads into proving grounds where bravery could outweigh brute force. Beyond the battlefield, the civilians suffered quietly. Small villages lay in the crossfire roofs, collapsed under snow windows, shattered by artillery, and families huddled in basements, listening to the distant roar of engines and explosions. The air smelled of smoke cordite and pine, a world suspended between winter's calm and the chaos of war. Every step forward carried the weight of history, and every encounter with a tank or patrol could decide life or death. The terrain itself dictated tactics. Soldiers moved carefully, hugging the contours of hills, sliding through snowdrifts and using frozen rivers as natural barriers. Ambushes were planned with precision, relying on patience as much as courage. The forest became a character of its own, whispering secrets of prior battles, masking movement and amplifying the terror of the first shot. Visibility was poor, the cold fog clinging to the earth, and shadows stretched unnaturally as the sun struggled to break through the dense canopy. Meanwhile, the German tanks advanced in calculated formations, confident in the destructive power they carried. Yet each snowdrift slowed them. Each tree, each ditch, each frozen creek became a threat. And then they encountered the Americans' unexpected innovation. The bazooka crews, small in number, but precise in aim, exploited the forest's cover. Shells struck steel with deafening cracks, sending metal shards flying and forcing tank crews to abandon vehicles they had trusted implicitly. Whispers of amazement and fear rippled along German lines. These weapons, simple yet devastating, were rewriting the rules of armored warfare. From the American perspective, the cold was relentless. Soldiers' breaths came in frosty clouds, fingers stiff and unresponsive, feet numb in wet boots. Yet determination burned hotter than fire in the barrels of their rifles. Every successful shot against a tank brought hope, a spark of morale that spread quickly among the beleaguered ranks. Stories of single men taking down entire armored columns would circulate, embellishments growing with each telling, mixing fact and folklore, but capturing the extraordinary tension of the Ardennes. And so the stage was set. A frozen forest, armored divisions, desperate infantry civilians trapped in between, and weapons that could tip the balance in moments. The cold, the snow, and the roar of engines combined to create a tableau both harsh and cinematic, a canvas for heroism, terror, and the unforeseen. The Battle of the Bulge, with all its desperation and ingenuity, was about to unfold. Records from the front lines show the staggering scale of the engagement. Over 120,000 American troops faced a German force that numbered more than 200,000, supported by some 200 tanks and assault guns. The Ardennes, with its narrow roads and steep ridges, funneled movement, making the clash almost inevitable. Diaries of infantrymen describe the chilling morning of December 16th, the air thick with frost boots crunching on snow that betrayed every step, and the distant thunder of engines growing steadily louder. The bazooka, officially designated the M1 rocket launcher, was still a relatively new tool in the American arsenal. Weighing just over 15 pounds, it allowed a single soldier to penetrate 3 inches of armor at a distance of up to 100 yards. Training had been accelerated due to the urgency of the German offensive, and yet reports indicate that many crews had never fired a live round before entering the Ardennes. Despite this, the weapon proved devastating. Soldiers' accounts recount striking Tiger and Panzer IV tanks, repeatedly observing shells punching through turrets and hatches, setting fuel and ammunition ablaze. Artillery logs and after-action reports detail the precise coordination required. Infantry would pin down German positions with rifle fire signal bazooka crews to target key armored vehicles and then retreat to covered positions before the enemy could respond. One report from the 99th Infantry Division notes that in a single morning, a squad of 6 bazooka operators disabled 3 heavy tanks, an outcome that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. Casualty reports from the German side confirm these incidents, citing sudden destruction of armored units, without apparent cause, reflecting the shock these new weapons created. Engineers and ordnance officers documented the performance of these weapons meticulously. Tests conducted post-battle measured penetration and trajectory under winter conditions, noting that cold weather marginally reduced the propellant's efficiency, but did not hinder accuracy when operators accounted for snow and wind. These facts, coupled with eyewitness testimonies, provide a comprehensive picture of how relatively simple innovations, training, positioning, and timing could overcome even the most formidable armored forces. Photographs, though rare due to the chaos, capture frozen moments of the battlefield. American soldiers huddled behind trees and ruins, bazookas raised smoke curling from freshly hit tanks. One image shows a Tiger tank with its turret twisted at an impossible angle, a testament to the sudden and precise devastation wrought by the M1 rockets. Historians cross-reference these images with unit logs, confirming locations, times, and outcomes, building an empirical understanding of how the Battle of the Bulge unfolded in those crucial first days. The terrain itself played a documented role. Frozen rivers and snow-laden hills forced tanks into predictable paths, exposing them to ambush. Maps recovered from command posts illustrate choke points where infantry and bazooka teams were positioned strategically. German after-action reports repeatedly mention unexpected resistance, citing ambushes by small mobile teams using unfamiliar weapons, a clear nod to the psychological as well as physical impact of the bazooka. Moreover, letters from soldiers on both sides reveal the human dimension behind these statistics. An American private wrote, "We were just a handful, but when the first tank went up in flames, the rest of them seemed to hesitate, as if the forest itself was against them." German officers noted in terse official correspondence that morale faltered quickly when armored units faced these light portable launchers, despite their superior numbers. The blend of material facts and human testimony paints a vivid, sobering picture of the battlefield. Supply and logistics records further illuminate the picture. Bazooka rockets were delivered under extreme conditions, often over icy roads and through snow-blocked passes. Units rationed ammunition, carefully knowing that each rocket had to count. Artillery officers coordinated closely, ensuring overlapping fields of fire. The integration of new technology, disciplined training, and careful planning demonstrates that what might appear as improvisation was in fact an intricate system of battlefield management. In sum, the fact layer reveals a multidimensional view. Thousands of men in freezing conditions, armored columns, advancing with confidence. New weapons deployed by minimally trained crews, and precise coordination exploiting the unforgiving terrain. Every statistic, every log entry, every photograph corroborates the extraordinary reality. Small, agile teams wielding bazookas could and did disrupt the mightiest armored divisions of the Third Reich. History is preserved not only in numbers, but in the minute-by-minute accounts, the trajectories of rockets and the frozen tracks of tanks in the Ardennes snow. Whispers traveled faster than gunfire through the frozen trees. Soldiers told of men who could aim bazookas with the precision of a marksman who had read the minds of tanks. In the smoke and chaos, figures seemed to vanish and reappear, moving through snowdrifts like phantoms. One private claimed he had seen a rocket strike a Tiger tank that had been stationary mere seconds before, as if guided by an unseen hand. Laughter and fear mingled in hushed voices around foxholes, the absurdity of war bending into legend. Rumors spread that some American crews were invincible, blessed by fate, or trained by spirits. German soldiers muttered about the ghost bazookas, weapons that struck without warning, that turned armored columns into wreckage as if the forest itself had risen against them. Journals mention nights when men swore they saw shadows move independently, guiding rockets toward their targets. Fact and imagination blurred as cold exhaustion and terror combined. Stories circulated of a single squad taking down entire companies of armor. Soldiers would exaggerate details to impress, to console themselves in the face of overwhelming odds. A lieutenant wrote in his diary that a bazooka crew moved like wolves, disappearing after each strike, leaving only fire and twisted steel in their wake. The tale spread from unit to unit, embellishing with every retelling until the bazooka itself became a character, a silent avenger, stalking the Ardennes. Even maps and tactical briefings could not account for these moments. Men spoke of tanks seemingly disabled before the rocket struck, as if anticipating the attack. Some attributed it to luck, some to skill beyond human comprehension. Others whispered that the cold forest carried a spirit of resistance, one that sided with the underdog, turning small, determined crews into legends overnight. One account describes a German officer pacing his command post, watching helplessly as a squad of Americans struck his armor again and again. He wrote later, "I have never known a weapon to terrify men so quickly. It is as if the forest itself conspires against us." Another soldier, an American, recounted seeing an entire platoon of tanks halted mid-advance, smoke rising in patterns that resembled ghostly fingers. No photographs capture these fleeting moments, but the stories endured, passed down in letters, oral accounts, and whispered confidences. Even in victory, folklore lingered. Survivors spoke of bazooka crews who vanished after battle, leaving no trace except for wreckage and the memory of their precision. The legend of the ghost shooters became part of the collective consciousness of both sides. Some historians would later dismiss it as myth. But soldiers' diaries, memoirs, and anecdotal reports preserve the uncanny, the mixture of fact and story blurred. Yet it conveyed the extraordinary tension of the Ardennes winter. The forest itself seemed alive in these tales. Trees creaking in the wind became sentinels, snow-laden branches, like arms guiding rockets. Men swore the silence before an attack carried a weight heavier than steel, a warning that something beyond strategy was at play. And when the first bazooka round struck, fear and awe spread simultaneously, embedding the weapon and its operators into the folklore of the war. In foxholes and command posts alike, tales grew. Bazooka crews were said to appear where least expected to vanish, when sought to strike with uncanny timing. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories shaped morale and perception, giving ordinary soldiers a sense of agency and extraordinary foes a sense of dread. The battlefield became as much a theater of myth as of material reality, where courage, fear, and imagination collided in the snow. By the end of December, the legend was inseparable from the facts. Soldiers would speak of the Battle of the Bulge as a place where the impossible was made possible, where a handful of men with simple weapons could bend history, and where the forest seemed to watch, judge, and intervene. The ghostly echo of bazookas ricocheting through the Ardennes would haunt recollections for decades to come. The effectiveness of the bazooka was not merely in its firepower, but in the systems that supported it. American squads were organized to maximize flexibility, combining scouts, infantry, and rocket teams in coordinated units. Positions were carefully selected, high ground. Natural cover, frozen streams, so that operators could fire and relocate before enemy retaliation. Movement was deliberate, calculated. Every action rehearsed, every pause a chance to observe the enemy's advance. Communication was vital. Runners and radios conveyed terse commands across the snowy battlefield. Artillery units overlapped fire zones with bazooka teams, forcing German tanks into narrow paths where rockets could strike. Field manuals emphasized the principle of redundancy. If one squad was pinned down or lost, another could step in, maintaining pressure on the armored columns. These systems were designed to exploit weaknesses in terrain and timing, turning seemingly inferior numbers into decisive advantage. Training had focused on rapid targeting. Soldiers learned to identify weak points in every type of German armor. Panzer IVs, Panthers, Tigers, studying angles, distance, and timing. Reloads were timed to coincide with smoke or snowstorms, using environmental factors as natural shields. One after-action report describes a squad that fired 3 rockets in quick succession at a single tank, disabling its tracks and turret before reinforcements could arrive. Precision and coordination multiplied the effect of each shot. The interplay of infantry and armor was deliberate. Riflemen suppressed machine gun nests and observation points, while bazooka operators engaged tanks. Engineers sometimes laid obstacles or anti-tank mines to funnel vehicles into predictable zones. The system relied on the orchestration of movement, terrain, and weaponry, each element reinforcing the others. Even supply lines were part of the equation. Rockets had to be delivered promptly to frontline teams, sometimes carried over miles of snow and ice. German formations, by contrast, depended on sheer firepower and momentum. Armored columns relied on speed and intimidation. Yet the American system disrupted this rhythm. A Tiger tank could no longer advance unchecked, its strength neutralized by mobility terrain knowledge and the strategic use of lightweight rocket weapons. Planners had anticipated that the first winter storm would hinder movement. They were correct, and every inch of slowed advance played into the hands of the bazooka crews. Observation posts were another integral component. Men equipped with binoculars and maps communicated enemy positions to firing teams. Snow-muffled sounds creating confusion about distance and numbers. Yet through careful coordination, the Americans could concentrate fire strike decisively and then vanish into the forest, leaving the enemy disoriented. The system combined human intuition with meticulous planning. Every motion, every shot, every retreat was a calculated element of battle rhythm. Even the psychological dimension was systemic. German officers reported that crews hesitated, expecting attacks from invisible angles. The unpredictability of bazooka deployment, coupled with forested terrain and winter conditions, magnified fear and slowed decision-making. Systems of deception, camouflage, and surprise reinforced each other, producing effects beyond raw firepower. A small mobile squad could incapacitate vehicles far larger and stronger than themselves. And so the battlefield became a network of interconnected systems. Bazooka squads, infantry teams, observation posts, obstacles, and supply lines all synchronized to exploit weaknesses in German tactics. The forest, snow, and weather were not obstacles, but components of the operational system, shaping every move, amplifying every shot. The clash of strategy, weaponry, and environment transformed the Ardennes into a proving ground where ingenuity and discipline could outweigh armor and numbers. The morning sun barely pierced the frost-laden forest as the clash erupted in full. Tanks rumbled like distant thunder engines, growling steel, grinding against frozen earth. American soldiers moved swiftly between snowdrifts and shattered trees. Bazookas, ready breaths visible in the icy air. Every heartbeat carried weight, every moment a decision between life and death. Then it began. The first rocket leapt from a soldier's shoulder, a flash of light in the gray morning. It struck a panther squarely, sending smoke and fire curling into the sky. The explosion reverberated through the trees, echoing like the cry of the forest itself. Men shouted orders, rifles cracked, and the forest trembled with the rhythm of destruction. Another bazooka fired. A Tiger tank's turret twisted violently, metal groaning crew scrambling. The balance of power shifted in seconds. Chaos reigned. Snow sprayed from tracks, machine guns spat fire, and yet the Americans pressed forward with calculated fury. Small squads emerged from behind debris, firing, retreating, firing again. The Germans struggled to regroup tanks, stalled engines, smoking officers shouting commands that could barely be heard above the roar. A bazooka round found the soft spot between armor plates, a single well-aimed shot toppling a vehicle. Awe and terror rippled through both sides. In the thick of it, individual acts of heroism stood out. A private, barely 20, braced against a tree, calculated the trajectory of his rocket in the biting wind. His hands numb, his eyes fixed, he fired impact. Steel-twisted fire leapt, and he ducked into cover, heart hammering. Nearby, a sergeant coordinated a trio of squads, calling shots, guiding rockets toward targets, turning disarray into orchestration. The battlefield became a living organism, responding to human will and ingenuity. Explosions tore through the frozen landscape, twisting metal and snow alike. The forest echoed with the shriek of engines and the thunder of rockets. Soldiers on both sides moved as though caught in a trance, reacting instinctively to smoke and shadow. One German officer wrote in disbelief later, "We advanced with confidence, only to find our might felled by handfuls of men, a weapon we could not comprehend." And indeed, the bazooka in the hands of determined infantry reshaped the battlefield in ways no armor could predict. Snow melted with fire and cordite trails marking the paths of destruction. Soldiers ducked and sprinted, firing again and again, exploiting every crevice, every ridge, every shadow. A tiger immobilized another burning, and yet the Americans advanced with methodical precision. Each rocket a statement, each hit a shockwave through morale. The forest itself seemed to lean in, whispering, amplifying the tension, making every strike feel monumental. By midday, the German advance faltered. Tanks stalled, infantry retreated, and pockets of resistance collapsed under the relentless rhythm of bazooka fire and coordinated infantry action. The forest, snow, and weaponry combined to produce an almost surreal tableau. Smoke hung like a shroud over shattered vehicles, the echo of explosions lingering long after the blast, leaving a battlefield frozen in both time and terror. And amid the chaos, soldiers' stories intertwined with legend. Whispered tales of phantom shooters, impossible hits, and tanks falling as if struck by fate. Each event, factual and anecdotal alike, contributed to a crescendo that would define the Battle of the Bulge in memory. By the afternoon, what had seemed impossible at dawn, ordinary men taking down the mightiest armored columns, had become reality. The peak of horror and heroism converged in that frozen forest in a moment of cinematic intensity that would echo through history. As the snow settled over the Ardennes, silence returned, punctuated only by the distant groan of engines and the crackle of lingering fires. The forest was littered with the remnants of war-twisted steel. Shattered turrets, spent shells, and the frozen forms of men who had faced both fear and courage in equal measure. The battlefield was a tableau of devastation, yet also of ingenuity and resilience. Reports filed that evening captured the staggering impact. Dozens of tanks disabled or destroyed, infantry casualties, significant, but the morale of American forces lifted by the extraordinary success of the bazooka teams. German commanders admitted in dispatches that their advance had been unexpectedly halted. Their pride wounded more deeply than their material losses. The cold, the snow, and the forest had combined with small mobile squads to create results that numbers alone could not explain. Survivors recounted the aftermath in letters and diaries. One private wrote, "We walked among the wreckage stunned. The roar was gone, but the echo of what we had done stayed with us. Every tank felled felt like a small miracle, and every frozen step forward carried the weight of those who did not survive." Another described the eerie quiet, the snow absorbing the cries and gunfire, leaving only memories. The psychological effect was profound. German soldiers reported shaken confidence in armored assaults, a new caution creeping into their tactics. The bazooka, once considered a minor weapon, had altered the perception of armored warfare. American troops, emboldened, spoke in hushed tones of ghost shooters and unstoppable squads. Fact and folklore intertwined, reinforcing morale and sowing doubt among the enemy. Logistical assessments highlighted the efficiency and necessity of small, well-trained teams. Ammunition expenditure, movement coordination, and terrain exploitation were analyzed in detail. The lessons of the Ardennes would inform future deployments, emphasizing mobility, terrain, familiarity, and combined arms strategy. The battle had proven that technology, even in its simplest form, could tip the balance when wielded by disciplined and innovative soldiers. Civilians emerged cautiously from their shelters, witnessing the aftermath of destruction and survival. Homes were damaged, roads blocked by wreckage, yet life persisted. The human cost was stark, but the stories of heroism and rapid adaptation offered a glimmer of hope amid despair. Local accounts would later blend with military reports, creating a layered narrative of tragedy, ingenuity, and resilience. The forest, once a silent witness, now held the echoes of legend. Bazooka teams were immortalized in oral accounts, memoirs, and photographs. Commanders debriefed soldiers, recounted historians, chronicled. Each layer of fact and folklore merged into a comprehensive understanding of the battle. The impact of small weapons, tactical foresight, and human courage left a mark not only on the terrain, but on the collective memory of the war. And so the Battle of the Bulge in this sector became more than a clash of steel and fire. It became a testament to innovation, to the unpredictability of combat, to the way ordinary men could shape extraordinary events. The aftermath was not merely measured in destroyed tanks and casualties, but in the enduring legend of the bazooka, the weapon that surprised empires, inspired soldiers, and turned a frozen forest into the proving ground of human ingenuity. The Ardennes forest, once alive, with thunderous engines, and the crackle of bazooka fire now lay in eerie stillness. Smoke drifted from scattered wreckage, curling into the cold sky, carrying with it the echoes of men who had faced both terror and courage. Snow reflected the pale winter sun, glinting over twisted steel and frozen footprints. Time seemed suspended. Survivors trudged cautiously through the aftermath, eyes wide, hearts heavy. Each glance at a destroyed tank or abandoned foxhole told stories that words alone could scarcely capture. Soldiers spoke in whispers of phantom shots of the uncanny precision of bazooka crews. Some claimed they still felt the presence of those unseen hands guiding rockets, shaping the course of battle. Historians would later piece together reports, diaries, and photographs. Yet gaps remained. Moments that defied logic, that blended fact with legend, that left both scholars and soldiers asking the same question: how much of what we remember is reality? And how much is the echo of imagination forged under fire? The forest itself seemed to remember. Trees bent under winter's weight, snow covering the scars of conflict. Yet if one listened closely, the whispers of the past lingered. Footsteps, the clank of metal, the distant roar of engines. As if history refused to let the Ardennes forget what had transpired within its frozen depths. And in the quiet aftermath, one could sense the human spirit prevailing. Ingenuity, courage, and resilience etched into memory. Ordinary men had faced extraordinary odds, and in the snow and shadow of the forest, they had left a legacy that would resonate for decades. Each bazooka fired, each tank felled, each life touched became part of a larger story of strategy, survival, and the unpredictable nature of war. What might have happened if those small, determined squads had faltered? If the forest had remained silent and the armored columns had swept unchecked through the Ardennes? History bends on such moments, and every detail, every whisper, every legend shapes the world that followed. You have just witnessed another chapter in the secret chronicles of World War II. The stories of soldiers, commanders, and weapons that history sometimes leaves untold. If you wish to continue exploring the moments that shaped battles, the human courage behind impossible odds, and the legends born in frozen forests and fire, subscribe and stay with us. For the echoes of war are never truly gone. The snow falls, the forest breathes, and the memory of December 1944 endures. Frozen, yet alive. Terrifying, yet awe-inspiring. The Battle of the Bulge and the improbable heroism of those who wielded bazookas will remain in the shadow and light of history.